Good day, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Just give me the thumbs up. Hello, how are you? How is everyone today? If you'd like, you can just unmute yourself for a moment just to say hello. I'd be happy for you to do that. My name is Lane Cobb. I am an interfaith minister and a holistic life and business coach. Primarily, I work with women. That is my special interest, helping middle-aged women like me reconnect with their passion, and have a couple of books out there. You can find me on Amazon. This show is actually part of a project that I've just started called Soul Power Ministries, and my goal is to launch some programs that teach spiritual principles, teach people how to apply spiritual principles in their life just to enhance their life, basically. So I just want to say hello. My partner in crime, Eugene Holden, has had to pick someone up from the airport. So he may or may not be able to join us. I encourage him to join us from his telephone. He was looking for someplace to get on his computer. But we will begin without him. What I'd like to do, though, is to thank you for being here. I'm hoping that we'll get some folks trickling in, perhaps. Today is a rough conversation, but I think you agree that all of these are a little bit rough. I just want to thank you for being courageous and for being loving. Basically, just being willing to have these conversations and to face something that might not be all that comfortable, and which is obviously rarely very comfortable, to talk about race relations, and particularly in this country. So today we're going to talk about white fragility and white privilege. We decided to go back a little bit. Last time at the end of the session, we said that we were going to talk about the economy of racism. We're going to save that for the next session, because that is a very deep conversation. And we thought that white fragility and white privilege would be a better intro for that conversation. What I'd like to do is, if you're not talking, I'd like you to remain muted. And if you'd like to talk, just unmute, raise your hand or anything like that. What I would love to do is ask anyone who's been at either of the last two sessions, would you like to share what you've gotten so far out of the sessions? Is there anybody that'd like to say, oh, I had an aha moment, or I learned something I didn't know? Anything that you'd like to share that you received from the last two sessions? And it's okay if you're not into sharing right now. You'll have plenty of opportunity to do that. Let me also say that if you're on the telephone, you can unmute by pressing *6. This is being recorded. We have not posted either of the first two sessions, but we're going to get to that by this week. And number 3 by next week, for sure. So what I want to do is just jump right into the conversation, if that's okay with everybody. And I'm not sure if I'm sure that you are familiar with the phrases white fragility and white privilege. I don't know whether or not you're familiar with what that exactly means. And so what I want to do, yes, Miss Carol has White Fragility by Miss Robin DiAngelo. She has become one of the the authorities lately on that subject. And, oh, hi, Greg, it's nice to see your face. And so I would recommend that book highly, and there are several others that I would recommend, but what I want you to know is that there are so many resources just on Google right now about white privilege and white fragility, from all angles, written by people of all races, sharing what their experiences are and some of the ways that we can kind of digest this material in a way that it allows us to digest it and not become overwhelmed. So one of the things that I wanted to say is, although we send you these resources every week, we want you to not become overwhelmed. So take your time with this stuff. Be kind to yourself. If you find yourself becoming overwhelmed, just stop and then come back to it. And you can always reach out to me or Eugene. We love to have one-on-one conversations about this stuff. So what I'd like to do is just give some very brief definitions of the terms that we're going to talk about, then talk a little bit about how they manifest, and then we're kind of going to open the floor and just have some, what I hope will be a very meaty conversation. So white fragility, the term white fragility actually refers to the discomfort and also defensiveness felt by a white person when confronted with information regarding racial injustice or inequality. And so it's not specific to a person of color confronting a white person necessarily. It can be anyone, and there is just a discomfort about facing that or having that conversation. So that is what white fragility means. And we'll kind of talk about how white fragility manifests and find out if you all have any stories you want to share about encountering white fragility. White privilege probably is a much wider known concept, and that is the inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society that is characterized by racial inequality or injustice. So by virtue of you being here, I can pretty much assume that you kind of could have a basis of understanding that racism is and has been an issue in the United States, and that there are multi-layered, I don't want to say concepts, but multi-layered conditions of racism in this country. And so white privilege is just an inherent advantage, and much of this is just unconscious, right? Color blindness is another concept that I just want to introduce. And color blindness is a concept whereby one claims not to see race, okay? And they claim not to see it as a way of transcending racism, but in reality, it actually negates the significance and the reality of racial and ethnic identity, right? So racial identity is a very important thing in this country because we have been socialized to identify with a particular race or a particular culture. And so that helps to form the basis of who we say we are and helps us to kind of create a game plan, if you will, for navigating life and to understand what the rules are for us as individuals to navigate life. And so you can imagine that it's a little difficult when someone comes to you and kind of confronts or asks you to confront your identity. All right, to ask, well, what is your identity based on a truth or not? And what does that say about my identity? So that's a little bit how those three concepts, white fragility, white privilege, and color blindness intersect. And color blindness actually was a result of the civil rights movement in the 60s, where when the Equal Rights Amendment and so forth were passed, Voting Rights Amendment, people said, well, okay, so now it's not good to talk about race, recognize race, and so we're just gonna be colorblind. And of course, it's really not, you can't be colorblind. There's no such thing as color blindness because it's in your face, right? It's in your, it is just right there. And because we're socialized, again, to recognize and categorize people, again, just because of our lizard kind of brain, we are geared towards survival, recognizing what we're familiar with and loving that, and then kind of what we're not familiar with, maybe not as comfortable, and realizing we have to process that a different way. So one of the things that we want to just talk about a little bit today, and I do want to shut up, but I want to give you this information before we start the conversation, okay? Because I want to have a good basis for the conversation, is how white fragility actually manifests, all right? So how white fragility actually shows up. And so if I'm talking, I'm coming and I'm talking to a white person that feels, and forgive me too, because I'm a little uncomfortable with white, black, you know, but the white people is the phrase. So I'm just going to use that, and I hope that doesn't offend anyone. So if I'm speaking to a white person, what may happen is denial that racism is an issue, all right? So racism isn't an issue in this country. You're just being overly sensitive. I don't understand what you're talking about. I don't see this. I'm not affected by this, and therefore you shouldn't be affected by this either, right? So anytime we're talking about, if in the workplace perhaps, and someone is saying, well, I feel stifled because, and I can see that it's because I think it may be because of my race, or I'm being passed over, and then one might be talking to a white coworker or cohort and say, you know, I think this might be happening. And that person says, yeah, it's not happening, it's your imagination, right? That's a manifestation of white privilege, okay? Being unable to even consider that what someone of color might be saying about their experience is true, right? And so actually also sometimes accusing the confronter of being racist. Like, no, you're racist, right? Because you just think that everything is about you, and, you know, white people, you're making white people bad and you're racist, okay? Defending oneself or playing the martyr. How dare you accuse me of being racist? Or how dare you, right? Like that. And, oh, you've hurt me so badly. I just don't want to talk about this anymore, right? So that is part of that white fragility reaction, excuse me. Denying that you have a racial preference or have participated in any way in systemic racism because of your own heritage or history. So if you're an immigrant, right, Irish, Italian, wherever, and you came to this country, your parents or your grandparents came to the country and they were discriminated against, well, based on the fact that we were discriminated against too, then we didn't discriminate against you because we were the victims and we get it, and it's not that big of a deal, right? You need to get over it, okay? Or you can't blame me. I wasn't here then. Like, I wasn't here when slavery happened, so it's not my fault. So those kind of, just briefly, that's kind of how white fragility manifests, okay? Now, Black people also are fragile, right? And a lot of people, we don't talk about this a whole lot. And one of the reasons why we don't talk about this as Black people is because it hurts. So imagine kind of feeling unwelcome in the country you were born in, and you have absolutely no choice. It's like, where are you gonna go? And so, and not really being able to participate fully, although we have tried to participate fully in the systems that are intrinsic in the United States, right? Democracy, so forth, whatever it is, and not being given a full voice. The experience of still having to pay the price for something, even though we are participating fully, right? In the democratic process, in the educational process, we're just trying to do what everybody else is doing. You can imagine that that creates some fragility, some level of pain, if you will. Like, I'm not welcome here and I don't get it. And I can't seem to get ahead of it. I'm not given a voice. No one wants to hear my experience. My experience is being invalidated. So that kind of is where the fragility of Black people comes into the conversation. And when we experience white fragility, we don't want to talk anymore. It's difficult. I believe in the resources last week or early this week, I sent out a video by a young woman in the UK who wrote a book, Why I Don't Talk to White People About Racism Anymore, or something like that, right? Excuse me, I'm just shifting a little bit. And if you saw that, you could kind of get the experience of just being so tired of trying to explain what's going on to people who have absolutely no capacity for hearing it. You got to get tired of something like that, you know? And you can kind of, and everybody can, I'm sure you can relate to an experience like this, right? So somebody, you got an issue and somebody just doesn't want to hear it. And when it happens often enough, you just stop talking. You just kind of clam up and say, well, all right, it's not worth it. The other thing is that speaking out in America for people of color has consequences. It has consequences. So if you speak up at work, you get demoted, you get fired, you get blackballed, people stop talking to you. They leave you out of the loop, right? Things happen like that. You press up because you want more voting rights, then there are factions who will then say, okay, you're not happy with this, we're gonna give you this, right? So we don't know what's coming. It's very hard to predict how our voice is going to be heard. And so given the history, we look at the history and say, it's not worth it. All right, let me just try to deal with what's on my plate, because clearly I'm not going to get a whole lot of support. So this is one of those times in history when when Black people are really seeing that there's so much more support for this conversation, that we are encouraged in many cases. And we are hoping that we can bring more people together. People of color, people of all cultures, white people, we want everybody in this conversation. So that's why Eugene and I decided to start this dialogue. And so I just wanted to do a couple of things here. And a couple of talking points are that we have very well understood in this country the concept of male privilege, right? Male privilege, class privilege, right? If you got more money, you got more privilege. Like, that's the way it works here. And so one of the questions is, why can't there be white privilege? Like, why would it be so hard for educated people, right, who say, yeah, and male privilege, yeah. Class privilege, yeah. White privilege, no. Why do you think that is so difficult for folks? Why do you think it's so difficult? Anybody got an idea? Yeah, Carol, you can unmute yourself, sweetie. Go right ahead. Upper right-hand corner of your thumbnail. There you go.
I got it.
Welcome.
Thanks. Well, I'm speaking a lot from what I've learned in this book, because I'm actually doing a Zoom group on the White Fragility book. We're almost done with it. One thing is that white people don't see themselves as racialized like everybody else. Like, we're the baseline and everybody else is other. So that we don't think of ourselves as being, it's like, well, no, there's white fragility. White's what there is, and then there are Black people and Asian people and Latina people. And so that can't really be a thing. But I have learned it is greatly a thing. And I went back, and you mentioned about the good-bad dynamic. When I first read this book in 2018, when it came out, I was somewhat offended because I did not consider myself racist. I mean, you know, my family is more than half not white. And I thought, you know, good people were not racist and bad people were racist. And racism had all to do with the racial slurs and all that kind of stuff. But it's just the privilege that we've had all along and all the stuff that goes with that, that we perpetuate.
Yeah.
It's not a good, bad thing.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And if you're not familiar with what Carol is speaking about, Robin DiAngelo in that book, White Privilege, talks about the fact that for many white people, we consider that racists are bad and not racist is good, right? So only bad people participate in racism. and or even any kind, right? So that negates, right, passive racism. I'm a good person. I couldn't possibly be contributing to systemic racism. And that it clearly isn't that. It's largely unconscious. And people don't like to look past that good, bad. You're saying I'm a bad person. I'm a good person, right? Very good. Yes, white in this country is normative, right? Normative. And quite frankly, since we came here, and also any group that comes, that immigrates here, actually their goal is to assimilate, right? So that means white is better because whites have a better life, right? So this must be what we need to do in order to be accepted. All right, so if you understand what I mean. So that is where white becomes normative. And yeah, enough said about that. Okay, anybody else? Why do you think it's hard for people to accept that there is white privilege? Charlie.
Yes, I'd say one of the biggest things is and I'm older than the average bear, so I haven't had to think about it. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I got interested in diversity inclusion through the church that I go to.
Mm.
And one of the first books I read was Growing Up White by
Love it.
Julie Lansman. And on page 9, I had to stop reading it after 9 pages because what I ran into was something that just rocked my world. Let me read it to you. To be raised with whiteness was to be raised to be part of a group who defined what was human, what was normal, and consequently, what was other. If we are white, it takes a cosmic shift to gain a new perspective. I thought, wow, cosmic shift, that's pretty big.
That's huge, right?
And I wanted that, and I've been working as my #1 hobby, if you will, to learn as much as I can. And at age 80, I tell people my #1 good quality is impatience. Because if you're 80 years old and you're still being patient about all this, you don't understand the situation. I have to work. I have to get this part of my life to count and to do good. So
I love it.
But
yeah.
I haven't, prior to that, I hadn't had to think of it. I can give you example after example of being a nice person and being around nice people. All my friends are nice people. All my friends are white. And how this white fragility was the first stumbling block because somebody's saying, hey, there's something you can do better, and let me tell you what it is. And especially old white guys don't like to be told what to do. So it's
Yeah.
their idea. I'm
Love
complete.
It. Thanks, Charlie. That's beautiful. So we can continue with this question, but let me put another question into the group, okay? If whites are sensitive about race discussion, why can't blacks be sensitive about racism? Why do you think, and it might be the same answer, but you know, in this country, it's like, they are just being so sensitive. I don't know what they're complaining about. And very often it's been said about us that we should just be grateful. We should be grateful, right? Oh, they don't live in their, you know, S-hole countries anymore. They're here, they got, you know, whatever. They should be grateful. We're not allowed to be sensitive. We're not allowed to be hurt. And I have to say also, there's a myth that comes from slavery that black people, we don't feel pain, people of color don't feel pain as much as white people. It's the strangest thing, but it's a truism. You can look it up. Like, and whose responsibility is it to do the work of dismantling systemic racism? So now we got 3 things to talk about. Yeah, Carol. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I thought that I just wanted to talk about my own experience because I don't know where it fits into your conversation, but my experience is that I have had a few conversations with Black people where they got very upset or like wanted to stop having a conversation with me when I would ask questions, particularly about colloquialisms, behaviors. Is it Southern? Is it Black? That kind of stuff for me to understand. When this whole Black Lives Matter thing started, what, like 3 years ago, I had to examine whether or not I was racist and what that meant. I'm about to have biracial grandchildren, and so having an integrated family is just a commonplace kind of thing for me. But so so my white sensitivity oftentimes is my reticence to talk to anybody of color about this issue. I also had a Latino woman. I had a conversation with her about race and whether or not she should be calling herself Hispanic, and got the same kind of reaction. So it's everybody's on edge. And so I would love to hear some responses to that as well.
Everybody is absolutely on edge. And race, again, as an identity, it is very close to the vest, right? Race and cultural identity. And so one of the things, there is another author whose name escapes me, I apologize, but she has a book out that's called So You Want to Talk About Race. And she says, be careful, white people, because just because now you're enthusiastic and you want to learn about a bunch of stuff, don't go up to somebody and just say, hey, you know, tell me about race. Tell me about, like, why do you do this and why do you do that and where's that come? Now, I personally get it about, you want to know, where does these colloquialisms come from? And it is somewhat like, it is fragile because we know that so much of our culture has been, what's the word? Like Native Americans, like indigenous people, the culture has been taken.
Appropriated.
Thank you. Appropriated, right? So taken and then kind of made white, and then, you know, it's like the thing, right? Then it's like the thing. So, you know, kind of like white people wearing dashikis, you know, back in the day, you know, or whatever. Nothing wrong with that, but nobody asked us. You know what I mean? Like, is this dashiki, is this important? Like, is this some kind of a, you know, what is this? And can I wear it, right? It's just like, no, I like it, let's just wear it. So that's kind of where the sensitivity comes from, I think. And what one kind of needs to do is say, hey, is it okay with you if I have a conversation or ask you a couple of things about your culture? And give the person an opportunity to say no, and then be okay with that, right? Don't have your feelings hurt. Doesn't mean anything about you. Just means they're not ready, right? It's better to do that. And the same thing as talking to from person of color talking to a white person, to say, hey, can I talk to you about something, you know, something that kind of bugged me, you know, or something that I don't know if you know, like, just ask somebody's permission first and see where they're at. Because there's some people that would be completely fine. And some people are just a little too fragile. You just don't know that person's history. And that's true for all of us, right? Yeah. Who else? Any of the questions? Yeah, Felicia. Yeah, thanks, hi.
Good morning.
Good
I
morning.
just want to say what a delight it is to be a part of this conversation. And I notice that one of the things that comes up when people want to try to engage in these conversations is a sense of right, wrong, good, bad. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to say it wrong. I don't want to damage the relationship. And so that tiptoeing around is a big piece of what makes it so challenging and so uncomfortable. And is it worth it for me to even try to have this conversation? And also underneath, I feel there's a fear of Black anger on both sides. You know, Black people get stereotyped as the angry Black woman or the dangerous angry Black man. And so there's a culture of, for Black people, I don't want to go there because then I fit into the stereotype. And I think on the other side, for white people, there's a fear of, if I touch into that anger, am I maybe even going to get hurt?
Yeah.
And so there's a way that, you know, it's not safe for any of us. It's not safe to be angry, and it's not safe to touch into that anger and be hurt in either way.
Yeah,
So that underlying stereotype is something that plays out even in our best intentions to have this conversation.
And I just want to say, Carol, I see your hand. Felicia, that is brilliant, because the stereotyping in this country leads the conversation, right? It keeps us from having the conversation because what we assume about someone, what we assume to be true, right? So yes, white America assumes that Black people are angry. And yeah, okay, maybe we are, but we're not all violent, right? We're not all angry, and we're certainly not all violent. And and the interesting thing about the conversation and the media and so forth is the difference between how the races are portrayed. And so Isabel Wilkerson has written a new book called Caste, which is very good, because she talks about that whole caste of the color of your skin, right? How much Blackness do you have in you? And she talks about the caste, not only in the United States, but in India. And then she talks about Nazi Germany and the ways that people are controlled based on and demonized, right? So it starts with the demonization. These people, we don't like them, or they're in our way or whatever. So let's just start this campaign to demonize these people. The bad part is, very often we, as the stereotyped group, start to believe that. And that diminishes us in so many ways. And one of the ways is because it mutes us, as you said, keeps us from having a dialogue to challenge the stereotype. Now, let me also say that it's worth reading. I'll send you another, I'll try to put this in the chat, but if I can't do it, I'll send you in the follow-up newsletter or email. What's it called? 10 examples that prove white privilege exists in every aspect imaginable. It is an article written by a white gentleman who said that he really has learned this through research, but also from having conversations with Black people. And he has very clearly shows how more acts of violence have been perpetrated by white people than Black people. But it's never, that's not in front. Like, that is not news that's talked about. That's not a fact that's talked about, right? That when a white person commits a crime and a Black person commits a crime, and they put the mugshots in the paper, right? They don't necessarily put a mugshot of a white person. They'll put a mugshot of a Black person, but they'll just put a picture of this white person, right? So these things happen over and over and over again. And so that really does corrupt our minds and the way we see ourselves. White people good, Black people bad. Thank you for that. Carol, I'm sorry. Thank you for waiting.
No, well, a couple things is, one thing I learned from this book too was, I mean, it was not this way for me, so I didn't really think about it, but some white people have grown up to be an adult without ever interacting with Black people or people of any other culture, and they don't see it that they've missed out on anything.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we're the baseline, this is the way it is.
Yeah. I don't need any Black people in my life, right? Exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much out there to learn that's wonderful about other cultures. And the stereotyping Felicia was talking about, I live in a suburb, which I would say is majority white. On my street, there are maybe 4 families of color out of the street. And 2 of my kids are white, 6 are not. And for example, so when you got 7 boys, you have the police here once in a while as they're grown up. And it infuriates me so bad to have heard officers who in my suburb are always white officers talk to my boys in a certain way. And then I go outside and they see this little short white woman and go, oh, you're their mother? And then they totally change.
Yeah.
That makes me crazy. And the woman facilitating my white fragility group, we have a little Facebook page, and I ranted because everybody's got a couple of those relatives who she put something very erroneous about George Floyd on Facebook. And I tried to say, check your facts, blah, blah, blah. But I went on my group and I was like ranting. And Melissa said to me, well, you need to do this and you need to do this. And you need to ask them why in a nice way. You're sort of calling them out. And I said to her, as a Black woman, how are you not angry all the time when people act like this? She's like, you can't let your emotions get carried away with you in order to educate people. And I wanted to punch somebody, but I didn't. Wouldn't be very ministerial of me, would it?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Are you finished, Carol?
But
I'm sorry. Go
it's
ahead.
it's hard not to be angry. I can't imagine being Black and not being angry. And my son is a teacher. He lost his teaching job. He went to all this training. He is now an armed security guard. I'm like, he's got this really nice Camaro. I'm like, I don't want you to become Philando Castile. I'm like, do you have to carry your gun when you're not working? He goes, Mom, I refuse to live that way. And I'm more like, I just want you to get home safe. But it's scary.
Yeah, it's very scary. Thank you, Carol. And one of the things that you pointed to, that is one of the white privileges, that white people can go their entire lives without ever having to speak to a Black person if they don't want to. And Black people, we need white people to get around in this country, right? To get a job, right? A driver's license, like whatever. There is no such thing as this Black society that you can just access whatever services you need and you don't have to talk to any white people. Because everybody in charge is white, right? There's no system that is in charge of Black people. So that is a white privilege. Thank you for pointing that out. Greg, I see you, but I wanted, Jen asked to be called on. Jen, are you still there, honey? There you are.
I am, yeah.
And I'm sorry, I called you Faye in the chat. Pardon me.
Oh, no worries. So a couple things. When I think it was Carol that said there's so much that we have to learn. And I need to say this before I start talking. My mom passed last week, and so I can get emotional and it just comes, and so I'm going to try not to, but just so you know, it's not necessarily about this topic. I'm just a little there's this undercurrent of emotion for me. So we have a lot to learn. This is a thing that I really think a lot of white people in particular don't understand about people of color and all the different cultures. My sense is that until we all really understand each other and learn the wisdom of these other cultures, and I'm a white person since you can't see me, but I think that's where really our salvation is. And so I know that's a big statement, and I don't know how that's going to happen, but I also wanted to mention about this book that you probably are aware of called My Grandmother's Hands. The subtitle is something about racialized trauma and our path to healing hearts, something like that. And this is coming from a very different perspective, because it's looking at trauma and that like he's the author. You know, when you read things on Kindle, the author's names, you don't see them over and over and they don't get in your head. Rasman.
Risma Minikin.
Thank you. Yes,
Thanks,
yes,
Sarah.
thank you. He's writing this book to three particular, he refers to bodies: white bodies, black bodies, and police officer bodies, because the trauma is held in the body.
Yes.
And I'm just, you know, I'm just explaining my very limited understanding of this, but you know, what I was so confused about was all of these unarmed black men that were just being shot for no reason. And he explains it with that when there's trauma, anything that triggers trauma, and it can be the memory of trauma that you're not even aware of, that's in your subconscious. It's the lizard brain that gets activated, and that lizard brain is all about, you know, keeping you safe, and there's a threat, and if you respond from that, which it's a very powerful part of our being, it does not allow the cognition. It doesn't allow processing. It's an instant response.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helped me understand that mystery. I mean, there's still a lot to be understood about, you know, why white police officers hold that trauma. But there is, like you were talking about, the myths that came from slavery about, you know, that black people were very strong and powerful and they don't feel pain and all of that. I think that's in there. That helps, you know, kind of explain it, helps to understand it, the trauma piece. The other thing I wanted to mention was there's a group they used to be called Better Angels, and they changed their name to Braver Angels. And they are a group that is trying to bring the progressives and the liberals, the progressives and the conservatives together. They do these whole day workshops, and it's very interesting the way that they do this work. They put, just briefly, they put the conservatives in a circle, and they put the liberals on the outside of the circle, and they have the conservatives share thoughts. It goes around the circle, everybody speaks to an issue, and then they do the same thing, switching positions, and then they bring the two sides together and have them discuss. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I have not participated in personally, but I did witness a documentary about that, and that's promising. But it's a very small groups, you know. I think it's 12 people, and in the last, I'm not sure how many years they've been working on this. I think it's just been a few years, you know. Maybe there's like 6,000 people that have participated. So it needs to be, I mean, I think it's worth the effort, but it needs to be broader, more people participating. And I know the local Unity Church here that I sometimes go to, they said they didn't have enough conservatives that were willing to participate to do it, to actually have the workshop. And it's a pretty big church.
And I think what you're pointing to, Jen, is another layer of white fragility. Okay.
Yes.
People do not want to give up their story. They want to get that their story is correct. They don't want it challenged. And it is hard for people to feel safe in any of these conversations where you feel challenged because you think you're going to be attacked and you're going to need to feel uncomfortable. And people do not want to feel uncomfortable. And that is one of the reasons why Eugene and I are so grateful that you all are participating in this platform, because we come together every week. We have a different, we have people who come and then, come back. And so what we're hoping is that we all are creating for ourselves another layer of understanding, which helps us be more courageous and can understand how to bring this conversation to our communities and our families in a loving way. And to also be able to let go. Like if somebody doesn't want to hear it, they don't want to participate, okay. We'll gently say, okay, I respect that. I don't understand that maybe, but I respect. So thank you for being that person, who really is willing to come out and speak on behalf of folks who want to actually make a difference, because that's what we're here for. The other thing that you're pointing to is that white people think that it is the responsibility of Black people to teach them about racism if they feel like it, right? It's like white people generally don't feel any obligation to learn about the experiences of other races because as it was said earlier, white people consider that their culture is normal. It was Toni Morrison said something, and she said, in America, American means white. Everyone else has to hyphenate, right? Right? And so you can look at that, right? Nobody else is said to be just American unless you're white. And so that is, you can see the myth in that, and what you were saying, Jen, the myth, right, of that. It's mythical, it's ridiculous. So I just thank you for that. I want to.
Can I just, I know this time is short. I just want to make one more comment. And Charlie was in on this workshop. This was probably 4 years ago because it was right before the last election in DC with Reverend Alex Escudero, and Eugene was part of that. And when we white people got the opportunity to listen to the stories of some of the Black people that were willing to share, that changed me forever. That changed me forever. I just got something. My heart was so open. And I'm complete.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for being willing to share at this fragile time.
You're welcome.
As well. Thank you so much for that. Mamie, I see your hand. Unmute yourself, dear.
Hi. I could sit here. I'm learning so much from listening, and it's tempting to not say anything because I am learning so much. I think if you're able to walk into a room and not have to navigate, to not kind of feel it out, that's a privilege. I've spent my whole career always having to feel the room out and see what was safe and what was not safe. If you have a child, especially a son, and you never had to teach him how to react if he was stopped by the police, how to not move, make sure you talk before you move, that's a privilege. And I just think, going back to what Carol said, how can Black people not be angry? I think it's important that you find a healthy place to put it, because it would be like drinking poison expecting the other person to die. It's like you have to find a healthy place to put it, otherwise you would be angry. And for me, I just realized I had to let those issues stay with that person being their issues, but I've always had to navigate, try to figure out what was the right move, what's the safe move, going into a room, how many Black people are they gonna hire today? It's always been something. I've always had to think hard, strategize about how I was gonna get through the situation. And it's exhausting. It became exhausting. And it was something that I finally had to walk away from for my sanity, because I just thought I can't give somebody else that power. Let me find something else I'm interested in doing and do that. But it's been my whole life always having to be aware of being Black, and to have friends to be able to walk into a room and not even have to be aware. I just found that interesting, having conversations with them, that it never occurred to them that they had to count how many white people were in the room and trying to get a job, or certain situations. That was always just my reality. And I found that for a lot of people. But I didn't get angry. I just realized that was just their reality and they didn't have to be aware. And I didn't expect them to acknowledge what I was going through, because They just didn't have to, but it was something that I've always just had to be aware of.
Yeah, and often, and they will not understand it. Like, here's the thing, and I get that. And what you said about it being exhausting, right? It's just darn exhausting. And so a lot of, in the, when we're talking about jobs and employment, many of the people who do the hiring say, well, we would hire people of color, but they just don't come in, they're not applying, right? So some of them are just like, that's not true. And in some instances, it is true, because Black people don't think they have a shot anyway, so they're not going to bother. Like, they just don't bother. And often, now that's not always true, obviously, right? But that is, again, one of those, one of the maleffects of sustained systemic racism, is that you start to believe that you're never going to get a break. And you do get angry, and Black people are often, we have learned to submerge our emotions, because we know that if we do get angry and express it, we are going to get labeled. And we're not going to get what we want. So there is, Carol, yeah, we're angry. And we just have learned that it's safer not to say anything. Greg? Thanks, Mamie.
Hey, this is a wonderful conversation. So I have a few things I'd like to say, and I'll be as quickly through them as I can. This is a great conversation, and thanks for the resources. Lane and Eugene, those have been great. Angela, D'Angelo, I'm sorry, Robin D'Angelo and others have been wonderful and insightful. The first question you asked, why do white people, don't see the privileges? I think so many of my acquaintances that are successful who are white, they erroneously think that they got there by themselves.
Yes.
It shocks me, absolutely shocks me, thinking that, oh no, I made this myself. I'm a millionaire because of this. Well, whose roads they went on, and et cetera, et cetera. I could go right down the line, but that's one thing. This is a good conversation, because I'm in another conversation on racism, and I was reacting to a Black man's share, and I said, I'm so angry, at George Floyd, and even this weekend, Kenosha, Jacob getting shot. And I was, saying, why, I'm so angry we don't let Black people live up to their potential. And a Black woman interrupted me and said, potential? Black people can't even live as humans. We don't even have that opportunity. And she said, and you being angry, that's just your privilege. You can be angry. And she was so right. She got me right between the eyes. And then she talked about, like others have talked about, that she says, I know how to drive south of the Mason-Dixon line, 10 and 2, 10 and 2. She says, I know how to deal. And I was reacting to a gentleman who was talking about how much terror he felt growing up in the Jim Crow South, and that every intersection with the white person was terrifying. And I was impacted by that and emoted, and I got a sense of her Black fragility about, listen, you don't even see what you don't see. And so anyway, I'm getting very well educated, and it's a long process. I appreciate everybody contributing.
Thank you, Greg. And
Thing I can mention.
Go ahead.
One more thing. I was toying with the idea of white privilege versus white advantage. And not to split hairs, but I think there's a little difference. White privileges, like for me to get angry and stay angry and not be at all afraid that someone's going to look down on me because I got angry, because I'm a white person, I'm not a threat. And then white advantage is clearly something a lot of people have because of the systemic racism. I don't know if I'm splitting hairs there, but I think there may be a nuance of what white people can do and not be blamed for versus the water we swim in, which is advantage towards the dominant culture, whites. Just a thought to muse on.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. In this case, I get what you're pointing at. It's two edges of the same sword. It cuts both ways. It just still cuts. You know, but yeah, I understand what you're pointing to. So we have 4 minutes. And I'd love for someone else just to say, what are you taking from this conversation? Is this something that you might take and talk to somebody else about? Yes, Carol.
Sure. I think it's getting to be a bigger and bigger conversation now. Not that it wasn't there before. Like, I think it was Greg that said about getting there on your own, or maybe it was Mamie.
It was
like, okay, so there's the male versus female thing, but Robin DiAngelo said, I assumed that I got my job at this professorship because of my credentials. A Black woman gets this job and people go, well, it's just affirmative action. She didn't really earn it, which is ridiculous. But I think a lot of what's being outed in the world now was there before, just perhaps the administration makes it more okay to be like that. And because that's outed more, I think there's more opportunities to talk about it. At least I hope so.
There definitely are more. Well, there's the occurrence of this is more urgent, right?
Yeah.
I would say, right?
Yeah.
And I have to say, if I'm sorry, I keep saying this, if that gentleman had not been killed the way he was killed on television, we'd still be having the same conversations or lack of conversations. All right. The fact that that policeman had his knee on that man's neck for 8 minutes and people actually saw it and could no longer say, oh, you're kidding. That could never happen. Right. And for Black people, it happens every single day, multiple times a day. So we know the reality of it. The way that it's now out there is because it was broadcast on television and there was no denying that that actually happened. And the gentleman was saying he can't breathe, and the gentleman was calling for his mother, and the gentleman, like that. Like, we could see that there was nothing he could have done that would have actually, we could see that was murder, basically, right? There is the interpretation for everyone. You see through the filter of your own reality. And so what we're doing here is we're starting to take the blinders off, right? We're changing the filter a little bit. And you know, Eugene and I are so grateful for this platform. I'm just gonna cry because it's so beautiful to have this kind of conversation where we're willing to listen and learn from each other. And so we're gonna need to stop.
Lane?
Yes, ma'am. Francine.
Oh, just to simply answer your question, yes, I'm learning so much that I am open and willing and eager to have conversations, especially with people that I know and people that I trust. So I thank you very, very much for this opportunity. I enjoy listening, and I may not say much because yet there's so much to be said. And the resources are phenomenal. I love reading.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And you know, that is important. We need to start with the people that we trust, and that will get us more comfortable with opening our mouths in other places. And that's what's important now, is we have to be angry enough or committed enough or whatever it is enough to start to open our mouths and say something. So I hate to stop because, as you said, there's so much to be said. We can't possibly contain this in an hour. So I definitely keep doing your research. Next week, we're going to talk about the economy of racism. Carol, you pointed to that like it's always been there, but now it's more visible. Honey, it's been there since they brought black people in chains here, okay? And it's been very, very methodical the whole time. So
watch the movie 13
Yeah.
before we talk about it.
Yeah, that's one of your resources. And I guess I'll thank you. Carol gave you an assignment. All right. It's on Netflix. Watch the movie 13th. All right. Very good. Anybody? Unless you have something burning, we're going to have to stop the broadcast. My email is always on the follow-up message. You can use Lane at lanecobb.com. Very easy. Eugene at eugeneholden.net to get to any of us. If you have something burning that you didn't get to talk about in the broadcast, please reach out to us. We love you. I honor you. I'm so grateful to you all. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.